A black woman helps a millionaire fix his broken car. When he sees the ring on her finger, he is immediately shocked. No one saw her. No one even remembered her name. But on that scorching afternoon, as the sun mercilessly beat down on the asphalt, she became the only lifeline for a man who seemed to have everything. A luxury car stopped on a forgotten road. A smoking engine. A powerful executive, accustomed to having the world at his feet, now vulnerable, lost, not even knowing how to ask for help. Thomas Weber punched the steering wheel of his Maserati in frustration, as he checked his platinum watch. 11:43, in exactly 17 minutes, he was supposed to be presenting the project that would define the future of his company to the most important investors in the country. Sweat was already soaking his silk shirt as he opened the hood, only to be greeted by a thick cloud of steam that made him instinctively recoil. "Damn it," he muttered, loosening his tie. His $3,000 Italian suit was not designed for mechanical repairs, and his knowledge of engines was non-existent. The irony of the situation did not escape him. The man who controlled a business empire, completely helpless in front of a pile of metal and cables he did not understand. The sound of an aging engine interrupted his despair. A pickup truck, worn down by time and sun, stopped a few yards away. Thomas watched skeptically as a woman stepped out of the vehicle. She wore grease-stained jeans, a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and her curly hair was pulled back into a practical bun. Her dark skin glistened in the harsh sun. "Need some help?" she asked, approaching with steady steps and a confidence that contrasted with Thomas's precarious situation. "I have a crucial meeting in 15 minutes, he replied, not hiding his irritation. "My assistant should be sending help, but there's no decent signal in this damn place." The woman didn't seem impressed by his apparent status or bad mood. Without asking permission, she leaned over the smoking engine, as if ownership of a vehicle that cost more than a house meant nothing. "It's the cooling system," she diagnosed with impressive confidence. "I can fix it temporarily, so you can make it to the city. It won't last long, but it'll give you a few hours." Thomas sized her up with a skeptical look, running his eyes over her in a not-so-subtle analysis. "Are you sure?" "I'm a mechanic," she replied dryly, holding his gaze without flinching. "I have a shop 10 miles from here." Without waiting for approval, she returned to the truck to fetch her tools. Her movements were precise, economical, without a single unnecessary gesture. She began working on the engine with absolute concentration. Her hands, small but strong, moved with surgical precision. "5 more minutes and you would have blown the engine completely," she commented without looking up, adjusting something Thomas couldn't even identify. "These models are powerful, but surprisingly delicate, like some people." The indirect remark didn't go unnoticed, but Thomas was too concerned about his meeting to feel offended. "How do you know so much about luxury cars working?" And Thomas stopped abruptly, aware of the prejudice in his unfinished question. "In a forgotten village," she finished, giving him a direct look over her shoulder. "I read. I study. I care about my work. Excellence is not exclusive to big cities, Mr. Weber." Thomas was surprised to hear his surname. "How do you know who I am?" "Your picture is often in the business section of the newspaper," she replied simply, closing the hood. "There. That should get you into town." "I owe you one," Thomas said, relieved. He pulled several bills from his leather wallet. "Please accept this as my thanks." It was when she held out her hand to receive the money that Thomas saw it. An antique silver ring with a small blue sapphire, surprisingly delicate for someone with such hard-working hands. A ring he knew perfectly well. The world seemed to freeze in that instant. A flash of memory crossed his mind. A girl with big expressive eyes, a promise exchanged under a leafy tree, the last gift his mother had given him before she died. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked, his voice more shaky than he would have liked to admit. The question hung in the scorching midday air. The woman instinctively closed her fist, partially protecting the jewel. "It was my mother's," she replied casually, although her gaze became cautious. "Why do you ask?" What the mechanic couldn't imagine was that 20 years earlier, that same ring had been placed on her small child's hands by a boy who promised to come back for her. A boy who would become the man standing in front of her. A man who had broken a sacred promise and now found her again in the most unlikely way possible. If this story of forgotten promises and unexpected reunions touched your heart, be sure to sign up to find out how a simple ring will become the catalyst for a revolution in the lives of these two strangers whom fate insists on reconnecting. Maya hardened her eyes when she noticed Thomas's fixation on the ring. She put the money in her pocket and turned away, walking determinedly toward her truck. If the car breaks down, the repair shop is 10 miles away. First entrance after the Aurora City sign. Thomas hesitated, torn between the crucial meeting and that disturbing discovery. That ring, he began, but she had already started the engine. Your meeting, Mr. Weber, Maya reminded him coldly. The investors are waiting. As the Maserati disappeared down the road, Maya stood motionless. He didn't recognize me, she murmured, stroking the ring with her thumb, an automatic gesture she had cultivated over 20 years. After all, he just didn't see me. At Hope Mechanical, Maya worked furiously on a dismantled engine, channeling her frustration into every movement. You're going to destroy that carburetor, observed Xavier, her uncle, approaching cautiously. Tall and gray-haired at the temples, he was the only one who knew her complete story. He showed up, Uncle X, with a broken-down car. Like some cruel twist of fate. Xavier froze. Thomas Weber, the boy who promised to return. The man who forgot, Maya corrected, drying her hands on a rag. He looked at me and saw only an anonymous mechanic. He recognized the ring, but not the girl who had kept it for 2 decades. That night, Maya opened a wooden box stored under her bed. Inside, carefully organized, were newspaper clippings tracing Thomas Weber's rise. His face appeared in articles about innovation, corporate philanthropy, and his recent engagement to Elise Harrington, heiress to a fashion industry fortune. Tomorrow, he won't even remember the ring, she murmured to the empty room. Maya was wrong. The next morning, an inconspicuous sedan pulled up outside the workshop. Thomas emerged, this time without his expensive suit, as if trying to go unnoticed. We're open, Maya said, keeping her distance. Actually, I came to return this, he replied, holding out his hand. In the center of his palm was a small carved wooden brooch, a bird with outstretched wings. Maya's world stopped. That brooch, her first sculpture, given to Thomas as a farewell gift. Open Heart Orphanage, Orion Section, he said softly. You were the girl who taught me how to carve wood when all the other boys made fun of me. You promised you'd come back, Maya said, the words escaping her involuntarily. I tried, Thomas replied, something dark crossing his face. For years, but my father, he had other plans. Xavier emerged from the work area, wiping his hands on a cloth, his eyes sizing Thomas up with accumulated suspicion. So the young prince returns, he commented in a low voice. 20 years later. Thomas held his gaze. I understand your mistrust, but I came to ask for a chance to explain. Xavier rescued me when I left the orphanage, Maya explained. He taught me everything I know. Gave me a home when no one else would. Something I promised to do, Thomas acknowledged with visible regret. Why now? Maya challenged. After all this time? Thomas took a deep breath. In 3 weeks, I'll officially announce my engagement to a woman I don't love, take over the presidency of a company I secretly detest, and complete my transformation into the man my father always demanded I be. He paused significantly. And then I saw you, or rather, I saw the ring, and something stirred. Thomas's phone rang insistently. On the screen, Elise, 6th call. She seems persistent, Maya observed bitterly. My jailer, he replied, hanging up. Our marriage is a corporate merger disguised as romance. And what do you expect from me? Maya asked, crossing her arms. Absolution for abandoning you? Answers, he said simply, and maybe a chance to correct the biggest mistake of my life. What Thomas didn't reveal was the investigation he had begun the night before, a thorough search of Maya Oliveira, her past in the orphanage, and the mysterious disappearance of documents related to the property that once belonged to her family. What Maya concealed was the file hidden in the back of her workshop, yellowed papers with the Weber Enterprises logo, signed by Thomas's father, detailing the fraudulent acquisition of the Oliveira family's land, the same land where the new corporate complex that would be Thomas's legacy now stood. As they stared at each other, neither realized that their destinies were intertwined by more than childhood memories, by a conspiracy that destroyed a family to build an empire. And in 3 weeks, when Thomas was supposed to seal his future, Maya would finally reveal the truth that could tear down everything the Weber family had built on injustice and lies. 3 days had passed since the unexpected reunion. Thomas canceled meetings and delegated responsibilities, immersing himself obsessively in old files. Something didn't fit in his father's story about the land that was now part of the new Weber business complex. At the family mansion, he was searching his father's office when he found a locked folder labeled Project Aurora, the same name as the town where Maya lived. Using the key he had secretly copied years ago, Thomas opened it and felt his blood run cold. Contracts, lawsuits, and one particularly disturbing document, a forged death certificate for Maya's mother. He faked her death, he muttered in disbelief, to get the land. At the same time, in Xavier's workshop, Maya was making her own decision. She had kept the truth for too long. "I'm going to confront him," she declared, revealing the hidden file to Xavier. "The documents are authentic. His father's signature is on all of them." "It's dangerous," Xavier warned. "The Webers destroyed your family once. They can do worse now." Maya caressed the sapphire ring. "I have nothing left to lose." That night, Thomas was driving his sedan toward the workshop when he received a message from Maya. "Central Square, 20 minutes, come alone." The square in Aurora City was deserted when Thomas arrived. Maya was waiting, sitting on a bench under a leafy tree, strangely similar to the one at the orphanage where they had met. "For 20 years, I wondered why my mother abandoned me," Maya began without preamble. "Why I lost everything in an instant." "Maya, I've discovered something terrible," Thomas interrupted, his eyes reflecting genuine horror. Your father faked my mother's death," she finished, handing him some yellowed papers. "Then he threatened her life if she tried to get me back. Also, he could take our land. Land with the largest reserve of fresh water in the region." Thomas paled as he examined the documents. The signature was unmistakable, the same one he had seen minutes earlier on his own discovery. "How did you get these?" he asked, his voice trembling. "My mother left them with Xavier, before she disappeared. He waited until I was old enough to understand." Maya pulled out an old photograph. "This is my mother, Amelia Oliveira. She didn't abandon me. She was forced to disappear." The photo showed a woman with a gentle face, wearing the same sapphire ring. In the background stretched a green valley, now transformed into concrete and steel bearing the Weber logo. "Tomorrow, I'm going to make everything public," Maya announced, at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new complex. Thomas stared at her, stunned. "There will be hundreds of reporters, investors, politicians." "Exactly," Maya confirmed, the perfect moment to reveal that the Weber empire was built on fraud, extortion, and destroyed lives. Thomas's phone rang insistently, his father, for the 5th time in a row. He ignored the call. "There's more," Maya continued. "I have reason to believe my mother is still alive." This revelation hit Thomas like a bolt of lightning. "How? Where?" "Her last communication came 8 years ago, an anonymous letter, but the handwriting was hers," Maya hesitated, "from a psychiatric clinic in New Hope." Thomas took a deep breath, making a decision that would change everything. "Don't wait until tomorrow," he said, his eyes meeting hers with new determination. "Let's go now, to the inauguration. My father moved the event up to tonight, fearing leaks about the project. No one knows except the inner circle." In the limousine on the way to the complex, Thomas explained his plan. "I have full access to the security system and the stage. I can put you in position at the exact moment to confront him publicly." What Thomas didn't say was that he had also discovered the exact location of Maya's mother, not in a clinic, but on a private Weber property, held as collateral for Amelia's silence. The event was lavish. The business and political elite admired the imposing complex built on what had once been the Oliveira family home. Ernesto Weber, impeccable in his suit, smiled for the cameras, his authority unquestionable. "Thomas, finally," he exclaimed when he saw his son. His eyes hardened when he noticed Maya beside him. "What is she doing here?" "A special guest, father," Thomas replied coldly. "Someone with a fascinating story about the origins of this land." Ernesto paled. "My office, now." In his luxurious office overlooking the devastated valley, the Weber patriarch stared at Maya with contempt. "How much?" he asked dryly. "What's your price for disappearing like your mother should have done?" "My mother," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling in her chest. "I want to know where she is." Ernesto laughed, a humorless sound. "After all these years, she probably doesn't even remember you." "She's alive, then," Thomas concluded, discreetly recording the conversation on his cell phone. "You've kept her prisoner for 20 years. Prisoner?" Ernesto dismissed the word with disdain. "I gave her a life of luxury in exchange for a piece of worthless land. It was a deal." "A deal made under threat is no deal," a new voice interjected. At the door stood Xavier, accompanied by an older woman whose eyes, identical to Maya's, overflowed with decades of contained pain. "Mother," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. Amelia Oliveira advanced slowly, her eyes fixed on the daughter she hadn't seen since she was a child. "Maya," she said simply, her voice choked with emotion. Behind them in the hallway, Elise watched the scene with clinical interest, her cell phone recording every word exchanged. The reunion between mother and daughter was about to expose not only the fraud behind the origins of the Weber Empire, but also reveal how excessive ambition had destroyed lives and torn families apart. A truth that not even all the money in the world could hide anymore. And while Ernesto Weber watched his empire of lies crumble before his eyes, an even more devastating truth remained hidden. Thomas was not his biological son, but an orphan adopted to replace the baby his wife had lost. A final twist that, when revealed, would complete the cycle of justice begun by a determined mechanic with a sapphire ring on her finger. Ernesto Weber's living room vibrated with tension as mother and daughter looked at each other for the first time in 20 years. The Weber patriarch, always controlling, seemed to have completely lost his grip on the situation. "Impossible," he muttered, taking a few steps back. "You were under constant surveillance." "Your money buys silence, Ernesto, but not true loyalty," Amelia replied, her voice strengthened by decades of pent-up pain. "Some guards have families, they have hearts." Maya, trembling, slowly approached her mother. 20 years of forced abandonment, 20 years of unanswered questions. When they embraced, there were no words, only tears that spoke louder than any speech. Thomas watched the scene, a storm of emotions crossing his face. "Why, father?" he finally asked. "Why destroy a family for a piece of land?" "That land was never just a piece of land," Ernesto replied, regaining some of his composure. "It's the largest reserve of drinking water in the region. It's worth billions, the future of this company." "And that justifies destroying lives?" Thomas asked, his voice heavy with contempt. "How do you justify that to yourself?" A dangerous gleam crossed Ernesto's eyes. "The same way I justified adopting an orphan to replace the son I lost." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas staggered, as if he had been struck. "What?" he whispered, the color draining from his face. "You think it's a coincidence that you spent 6 months in that orphanage?" Ernesto laughed bitterly. "Your mother died in childbirth along with our real son. You were just a convenient replacement, a baby with no problematic medical history, no family to interfere." The revelation hit Thomas like an avalanche. His entire life, his entire identity, had been built on a lie. He wasn't a Weber by blood. He was an orphan whose records had been manipulated, just like Maya's. "He's lying," said Elise, finally entering the room. In her hands was an old file. "This explains why I always felt there was something wrong with our corporate merger." "What have you done?" Ernesto asked, turning pale at the sight of the file. Proper research before a business marriage, she replied coldly, including your complete history of fraudulent adoptions. You didn't just adopt Thomas. There were others. Xavier approached Thomas, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. This means that you and Maya, you're not just childhood friends, Elise finished. You're half-siblings, same mother. Documents forged to hide the connection. Maya and Thomas looked at each other. The truth reflected in their identical eyes. Same shade, same shape. How had no one noticed before? That's why the ring meant so much to both of you, Amelia murmured. It was our family heirloom. I gave it to Thomas before Ernesto took him away, making him believe it was a gift from the mother he never knew. At that moment, police sirens sounded in the distance, rapidly approaching. This ends now, announced Thomas, his voice finding new determination. All the lies, all the manipulation. The following week, the newspapers exploded with headlines about the scandal. Ernesto Weber, respected magnate, arrested for fraud, kidnapping, and document forgery. The Weber empire, built on crime and the separation of families, collapsed as investigations revealed decades of corruption. Thomas, discovering his true identity as Amelia Olivera's son, renounced the Weber name and took his real surname. The land was legally returned to the Olivera family, and the corporate project was transformed into an environmental reserve with a community center benefiting hundreds of local families. 6 months later, in the small Esperanza Mechanica workshop, now expanded and modernized, Maya adjusted a car engine, while Thomas reviewed documents for the newly created Olivera Foundation for Abandoned Children. Is it still strange, she asked, wiping grease from her hands, to find out that your whole life was built on a lie? Thomas smiled, a genuine smile he had rarely shown in his previous life. Strange, yes, but also liberating. He touched the small bird brooch he now wore as a pendant. We lost 20 years, but we regained our truth. Our family. Amelia entered the workshop, carrying lemonade. Her eyes, once marked by sadness, now shone with the peace of someone who had finally found justice. The ring, she said, noticing that Maya was still wearing it. It always kept us connected, even when we didn't know it. Sometimes, the most elaborate lies are undone by the simplest of ties. A ring passed from mother to son, then to a sister who didn't even know she existed. And sometimes, empires built on injustice crumble, not under the weight of guilt, but under the unshakable force of truth that resurfaces when least expected. If this story about family ties buried under decades of lies touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how the truth, however painful, has the power to heal wounds that seemed permanent and reconnect lives that were separated by greed and power.